Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the One to Know podcast. I'm Joel Haas.
I'm Avery Hill.
And I'm Lexi Linderman.
Today, we'll preview Penn State's upcoming matchup against Kent State. We'll also talk about Kevin Winston Jr.'s injury and what it means for Penn State. And then we'll talk about some former players and coaches who are at different stops. So to start it off, Penn State welcomes Kent State to Beaver Stadium. What are your guys' thoughts on the matchup?
I think you thought Bowling Green would be the cupcake game, but I think this really is the cupcake game. Of course, they might have another Bowling Green episode where they just do absolutely nothing in the first half and kind of, go down like they did. But I do think that Kent State is a much weaker team. They allow the most, or they gained the least amount of yards in the FBS, was at 134th place at 201 yards. They have basically no run game. Kai Thomas, he had a good year maybe 3 years ago, but this year he's not really much to work with. He's averaging like 2.8 yards a carry. They don't really have much to work with defensively. I think with their coach being Kenny Burns, he's in the second year. I think this is another rebuilding season. They're like 1-12 in the last 13 games. So yeah, there's not really much for Kent State to work with. So I think it's another cupcake game for Penn State. I think one that they'll take out a lot easier than they did Bowling Green.
Yeah, I agree. I think, honestly, Kent State is statistically one of the worst, if not the worst teams in the FBS. I think this is Penn State's real last chance to have a kind of cupcake game like this where they can actually get depth guys in there, get depth guys some playing time because, looking forward, they start Big Ten play, and it's just going to get tougher from there. We thought Bowling Green was going to be easier than it was, but I honestly think this game is just going to be that easy. I don't think Kent State's a very good football team. I think Penn State's a pretty good football team, so I honestly just think this is a good chance for Penn State to really get some of those depth guys going.
Yeah, and Penn State is a team that plays a lot of cupcakes. Like you look at, their recent track record. That's probably James Franklin's favorite food. They've played a lot of cupcakes these past few years. But you look at Kent State, and that might be maybe even the easiest game they've had under Franklin. Maybe some of those FCS schools, maybe Villanova or Idaho, kind of come to mind. But regardless, this should be a pretty big blowout for Penn State. Obviously ranked the number 10 team in the country. They fell a little bit, which they were on bye, so...
That happens. It happens. You're on a bye. They have no reason to vote for you. And, of course, the Bowling Green game still did happen. So they're like, okay, we can move them down a couple of spots. That does happen. But I do think that if Penn State struggles at all, I know I said Kent State would score 16 points, but now that I think about it, no, they're not scoring 16 points. You're going back on the pick? Yeah, I'm going back on that. Give them 6, 5, 8.
Yeah,
Safety. Yeah, something like that. I think that's really the only way. Maybe Drew Aller just drops the ball, falls out the back of the end zone, or pulls a Dan Orlovsky. But I think if they do struggle at all, I do think that's a problem. That's something you got to look into because again, they are the literal worst team in the FBS. There's FCS teams that would wipe the floor with them. So I think this is a game for Penn State to really show out and just work on what they worked on during the bye week. Honestly, it's a second bye week. Obviously, they don't want to think about it like that, but it's really a second bye week. So they should be able to take care of business and just really run through the golden flashes.
Yeah, I just think it's a good opportunity for them to get put in practice or put in game what they've been working on in practice. Franklin talks a lot about lowering the amount of penalties. I think this is a big opportunity for them to have a clean game. There's no need for them to have any penalties. This is not an opponent where you are going to be holding or need to do defensive pass interference, anything like that. So I think this is a good opportunity for them. It's also a good opportunity for them to work on third downs as an offense because I think Kent State's defense is so bad that they should probably the Penn State's offense should be on the field probably the majority of the game. And I know Franklin's talked a lot about he wants to get better on third down. We heard Katron talk about it yesterday. That's been a huge point of emphasis for them this week during practice. So I think those two things, it's a really good opportunity for them to work on the areas they want to see growth in, especially with, Illinois coming to town next week who just cracked the top 25. They need to be able to reduce penalties and do well on third down if they want to, beat Illinois.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You kind of look at what Kent State has been able to do this year, and they got blown out by a Pitt team that
scored 24 points.
They scored 24 points against Pitt. One was a scoop and score. But that's a Pitt team that won 3-9 last year. I don't think they're expected to make a bowl this year. But they also lost to St. Francis, an FCS school. That's rough. Never want to see that. And then the Tennessee game. they enter that game as 49-point favorites, and Tennessee's covering by halftime and setting program records, and end up losing 71-0 to Tennessee. And you look at this week, Penn State now enters as 49-point favorites. So I mean, do you guys have Penn State covering that spread?
By far. I mean, I think if you look at the Tennessee game, they hit the ground hard and still score 71 points. Usually when you run the ball, that'll kind of put the score down just a little. No. Like, I think that'll be another game for Penn State to work on its run game. I mean, Andy Kotelnicki, he's been getting Nick Singleton and Kaytron out on the ball, getting them in the backfield at the same time. I think it'll be very interesting to see how he works them together in this game. I think this is a game to kind of experiment, not show too much because you're going to win the game, but still experiment with them, even experiment with Cam Wallace and say you want to throw somebody else in the backfield. I think it's a time to kind of experiment. So, yeah, I think they'll cover. Not a doubt.
Yeah, I think they'll cover. And honestly, if they don't cover, then that's a big concern.
Yeah.
I feel like they should be beating Kent State by more than 49 points. It should be maybe like 50, 60. I mean, I predicted, 58-7. So it's 51. But so I think they'll definitely cover. But like I said, if they don't, then that's a bit of a cause for concern, especially because they're supposed to be up there with like the Tennessees of the world, and Tennessee beat them by 71 points. So, they need to they don't need to match it, but like, they should.
No, they need to match it, I think.
Going for the record. I mean, I think if you're Penn State, realistically, you should be able to score as many points as you want to score. So it's kind of up to James Franklin.
Yeah.
How long you're going to leave the starters in, how long you're going to leave the backups in, maybe how long you're going to leave the third stringers in before you bring in the all freshman team. But I think realistically, Penn State should be able to score at will in this one, and it'll just kind of come down to how conservative do they want to be? Maybe they don't want to show too much, so they're kind of playing some conservative offense with very simple play calls and things like that. But, I mean, you look at the way Tennessee just dismantled them last week, and, even, the other games, losing to St. Francis, giving up 55 to a pretty bad Pitt team. I mean, even Penn State's, backups, third strings, whatever, should have some success against Penn State's or Kent State's defense. So I think it kind of comes down to, can Ethan Grunkemeyer hit Tyseer Denmark in the fourth quarter to cover? I think it's kind of what it'll end up coming down to. But, Avery, did you want to change the score prediction, put an official new one on the record?
Yeah, official prediction, 67-3.
And then, like I say, I think you said yours.
Yeah,
but
58-7. 58-7.
Gotcha. And then I've got 55-3. So I think we all have them covering. But again, I think it kind of comes down to what's going to happen once those backups come into the game later. But we can pivot to a different topic because arguably the news of the week, as announced by James Franklin after practice on Wednesday, Kevin Winston Jr. is out with a long-term injury. That's all we got. I mean, Franklin was asked about it on Monday and, kind of deferred. He said he would answer that on Wednesday. So he got asked again Wednesday, and he said 2 words. He said long-term. Then we moved on to the next question, to which the answer was short-term. But, I mean, that obviously impacts Penn State's safety room. We know what they have there. They've got Jalen Reed and they've got Zachy Wheatley, who have looked good. But it'll be kind of interesting to see, how they look now. We've heard about Jalen Reed kind of moving back to that safety role instead of playing the Lion, with Cam Miller kind of filling in as a Lion now, which I thought was kind of interesting because now you've got a few guys moving positions because of this. It's not just like one guy stepping into that role. It's, a few guys who have to kind of change what they're doing. I mean, do you guys feel like Penn State has the depth at that position to be fine, or is this kind of something to worry about now?
I think they're okay. I honestly just think it's obviously just a huge blow for Penn State. I mean, KJ Winston is one of the best safeties in the country. They're gonna miss him a lot as the season progresses. I mean, obviously this week you won't see the ramifications of it, but you will soon. I think the biggest one, like you said, Joel, is Jalen Reed not being able to play that Lion the entire game because of Tom Allen's three safety look. I mean, I think Reed was just looking absolutely dominant at the Lion, and now they're forced to put him high, which I think looking down the line is not, it's going to not take away from what Reed's able to do, but he won't have as big of a presence, which I think is a huge blow too, just looking at that. And but I think Cam Miller will be fine in the Lion role. I just think, like I said, they'd rather have Jalen Reed there. But other than that, I think Zachy is is still good to have on the field. He's going to be a good starter. He's kind of proven this offseason that his improvement. I think he's gotten a lot better. And then there's also the freshman, DeJon Lane, that Franklin's talked a lot about. They're super high on him. He has the green light to burn his red shirt, so I think we're going to see a lot of him going forward. So it's kind of just like a little up in the air with him, though, because we haven't seen that much. So hopefully this weekend we'll see how he actually looks in game. But
yeah, I mean, I think they're fine, and I do think, of course, you never want injury, but I think it's better happening now than later in the season where they're, like, in the stretch of it. Like, they're playing Kent State, so they have a time to, okay, let's get DeJuan Lane in there. Let's get him going. Let's get him some reps, get the other guys. I know he mentioned Antoine Belgrave Short is another one, another freshman, I think. So I think they're fine, but my concern comes with the players themselves. Like Jalen Reed, of course, he was thriving at that line position. I think that was a position that was really going to boost his draft stock. Like, it allows him to be all over the field. It allows him to still play that safety, play that linebacker, play some corner, and show his ability to just be versatile, which is becoming more and more important for safeties in the NFL. So I think that hurts him, and of course it hurts KJ. I mean, he's on the way of, probably being without the injury, let's say first 2, maybe 3 rounds if he slips to the 3rd round, but I would say first or second round pick type of guy, or second round pick type of guy. So I think it hurts him, and I think, of course, you want him to get back as soon as possible because that's his draft stock. I mean, last year he led the team in tackles, but he didn't have the snaps. We thought this year would be the year where he's going to be able to play that 500, 600, 700 snaps and actually have an impact and maybe even get, let's say, All-American status, but now that'll obviously be tampered with, so it's unfortunate.
Yeah, definitely hurts the depth. And again, we really have no timeline, but just based on kind of historically how Franklin has handled these long-term usually means at least 5 or 6 weeks, not necessarily the entire season. So there's a chance he comes back. And, that's a guy that you would love to have against Ohio State and USC and teams with a great passing attack that are really going to challenge Penn State's defense. But, I mean, even if he can't come back for that, potentially maybe a postseason appearance would be big for Penn State if they could get him back. But realistically, we have no idea the timeline. I mean, it could be, the entire season easily. So we'll kind of have to wait and see on that. And one thing that kind of hurts Penn State here is the transfer of King Mack. Over the offseason, he returns to Alabama, his home state, to play for the Crimson Tide. I believe I saw he has like 1 tackle through 3 games so far for them. But obviously that hurts your depth at safety because I think he was kind of that 4th guy who would have been able to step in this kind of situation, and now he's gone. That's something Franklin's talked about is how, the transfer portal has hurt teams' depth because they're not able to keep those backups on the roster, and it's hurting a lot of the top teams. So that's just an interesting thing to note. But, I mean, looking at some of the other guys who have left the program, if we can kind of pivot here, other teams that were in action this past week, we got to see some former Penn State players, notably Keandre Lambert-Smith with Auburn and what he's been able to do there. I think he's up to 3 touchdowns now through 3 weeks, which, looks pretty impressive. I think the receptions is only like 5 or 6, but he's been turning them into big plays, which is kind of what we saw at Penn State was the explosiveness. It's been interesting to see 2 of those touchdowns. I think he had 2 touchdowns on 3 catches on Saturday, but it came against Alabama A&M, which I don't know how much you want to read into that. I mean, if it was Texas A&M, that's something different. But until they really get into the heart of the SEC schedule, I'll be kind of interested to see what happens with him there. Because that's kind of with Penn State, that was when he kind of tailed off. Was once they got into Big Ten play and things like that. And even some other coaches and around the league who were at Penn State have been finding success. Namely Bill O'Brien, former Penn State head coach who was here before Franklin. Franklin actually got asked about Bill O'Brien, which I thought was kind of an interesting off-topic question, but he answered it, talked about kind of, watching Bill O'Brien from afar and what he's noticed from him. But, I mean, you look around the league and there are a lot of guys who used to be, either a player at Penn State, either a coach at Penn State, whatever it was. So who are some of the coaches who have stood out to you guys?
Well, I think obviously the first instinct is to look at Manny Diaz, just left the team after a big year for the defense last year. He's at Duke now, has him off to a 3-0 start. But it's a little iffy. I mean, they only gave up 3 points to Elon, which, okay, good. But then 20 to Northwestern, who, not very good at football, and 21 to UConn, who also not very good at football. I honestly think, though, I don't know if it's a defense problem. I think and also he doesn't have the talent he had at
Yeah, I
Penn
think
State,
it's a
obviously.
personnel issue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
for
it's a
sure.
personnel issue. I also think it might be an offense issue. Like the offense is just not good enough to stay on the field and keep the defense off the field. I mean, they only gave up 135 passing yards to UConn, but still gave up 21 points. So it's like, I think the rushing defense is a problem. But overall, I think Manny Diaz is doing a great job. I mean, Duke, the ACC, not good this year, really. So, I mean, he has a chance to, kind of make Duke a football school. But I mean, it's just year one. I think he's just got to get the recruiting built back up, get some better personnel in there. But it looks pretty good so far.
Yeah, I think for me, they're 0-3, but I would say Ricky Ronnie with Old Dominion. I think, of course, 24-19 to South Carolina, they did almost win that game. Like, that was a really good game. Obviously lost to Virginia Tech by 20, but, they're showing good things, and you have to put it in perspective. They just left the Conference USA in 2022 was their last year in Conference USA. They're 2 years into a new conference. The Sun Belt is not an easy conference. It's getting better and better every year, in my opinion. I think the transfer portal changed that a little bit, but I do think they're out of all conferences that are not, Power 4 now. They're one of those conferences that can get those guys, at least get, quick hitters, and they do have a good defense. They've been all over the field. They have a lot of sacks this year. So, yeah, I think Ricky Ronnie, he's doing a good job, and he's building a program. It won't be right now, but, that's college football sometimes. It'll take a few years. I don't think they'll ever be, at the level I had them in college football 25, but I do think they will, be able to compete for the Sun Belt in the years to come.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you guys for watching. For more football coverage, you can find us at psucollegian.com and follow us on socials.